Hey guys, tonight we are venturing into the ancient Korean court, specifically into the quiet, bustling heart of its royal kitchen. Forget the palace intrigue and the grand ceremonies for a moment. We're focusing on something far more grounded, something that requires patience, precision, and a willingness to, well, wait. We're going to painstakingly, methodically, and perhaps incredibly slowly, examine the process of preparing a 7-day fermented beef soup. Picture the scene. The soft glow of oil lamps mixes with the first hint of dawn filtering through high windows. Large clay pots stand silently by low-burning fires, and the air is thick with the subtle, complex aromas of simmering broths and something else. Something a little pungent, a little promising, the smell of things slowly transforming over time. You are there, one person among many, moving quietly, purposefully, part of a system dedicated to feeding royalty. It's a world of ritual, tradition, and remarkably slow cooking. Honestly, focusing on the details of 7-day fermentation might just put you to sleep before we even get to day 2. You probably won't survive the sheer lack of adrenaline. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fun to see who's trying to drift off with me around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself in the heart of the royal kitchen in, say, the Goryeo or Joseon dynasty of Korea. This isn't your average home kitchen. This is a large, well-organized operation, staffed by numerous cooks, apprentices, and laborers, all working under the direction of senior culinary officials. The space is likely divided into different areas, one for preparing vegetables, one for handling meats, one for cooking various types of dishes, and perhaps areas for storage and, relevant to us tonight, fermentation. This existence of highly structured and specialized royal kitchens in ancient Korean courts responsible for the king's extensive daily meals is a mainstream historical fact, reflecting the importance of food in royal life and governance. It was a seriously professional kitchen setup, like a Michelin-starred restaurant, but for one very important, very demanding customer. The air here isn't necessarily filled with the loud clatter and bang of a modern restaurant kitchen. While busy, there's a sense of quiet efficiency, a respect for the ingredients and the purpose of the work. Tools are simple but effective: heavy stone mortars, sharp knives, sturdy wooden cutting boards, large clay pots and vessels, and the ever-present low-burning fires fueled by wood. The sounds are muted, the soft scraping of a knife on a board, the gentle bubbling of a distant pot, the quiet shuffle of straw sandals on the floor, hushed instructions given in low tones. Your role in this operation tonight is specific. You are involved in the preparation of a particular dish, a fermented beef soup. This isn't just any soup. The fermentation step adds a layer of complexity, a depth of flavor, and requires a significant investment of time. 7 days, to be precise. 7 days of quiet transformation happening in a pot, guided by unseen microbial processes and carefully monitored by human hands. It's slower than watching grass grow, but arguably more aromatic. The concept of fermentation was not new or unique to ancient Korea. Cultures around the world have practiced fermentation for millennia, from making bread and beverages to preserving and enhancing the flavor of foods. In Korea specifically, fermentation is deeply ingrained in the culinary tradition, most famously with kimchi, but also with various sauces, pastes, like doenjang and gochujang, and even fermented fish or meat products. So, a fermented beef soup fits within a broader cultural context of harnessing microbial activity for delicious, and sometimes pungent, results. It's like the ancient Koreans were way ahead of the curve on probiotics, but with beef. But why ferment the beef for soup? Fermentation can tenderize meat, break down tough fibers, make nutrients more available, and, importantly, develop complex umami flavors. It's a way of transforming simple ingredients into something richer and more profound. It also served as a form of preservation, extending the shelf life of meat in the days before refrigeration. Taking a cut of beef and letting it sit for a week in a controlled environment was a deliberate culinary technique aimed at enhancing both taste and longevity. Imagine explaining that to your health inspector today. Yes, it's supposed to smell like that. It's been aging. Preparing a dish for the royal court meant adhering to strict standards and specific procedures. Recipes weren't just suggestions, they were protocols, passed down through generations of court cooks. Every step mattered, from the sourcing of the ingredients to the final presentation. Your task is part of this meticulous process, contributing to a dish destined for the king's table. No pressure, just make sure the bacteria are happy and the soup doesn't, accidentally poison anyone. A quirky tidbit about court kitchens is the sheer scale and variety of dishes prepared daily. The king's meals were elaborate affairs, often consisting of numerous small dishes, requiring constant activity and specialized skills from the kitchen staff. Our humble fermented beef soup is just one item among many, each demanding its own specific preparation and timing. It was like catering a continuous, high-stakes banquet every single day. Historians still argue whether the precise fermentation methods used in ancient Korean court kitchens were primarily developed through empirical trial and error over centuries, or if there were specific theoretical understandings, by ancient standards, of the processes involved that guided the cooks. Did they just know if you leave this beef like this for 7 days, it gets delicious, or did they have a more systematic, albeit non-microscopic, understanding of why it worked? The knowledge was certainly passed down rigorously, but the underlying rationale beyond the practical outcome is a subject of ongoing scholarly discussion. So, you are in this environment, surrounded by the quiet industry of the court kitchen. You've been assigned to the task of initiating the fermentation process for the beef soup. It requires attention to detail, clean hands, as much as possible in the ancient world, and a patient mind. The process begins not with fire and rapid boiling, but with selection, preparation, and placing ingredients together to quietly transform over the next week. It's a slow start to a slow process, perfectly suited for unwinding your mind and gently guiding you towards sleep. The air smells faintly of potential flavor, waiting to develop. And your quiet task is about to begin, starting with the very source of the main ingredient, the beef itself. But first, let's just soak in this calm, methodical environment for a moment. Feel the cool stone or earth floor beneath your feet, hear the distant sounds, breathe the complex air of the ancient court kitchen. It's peaceful, focused, and deliciously, wonderfully mundane. Get ready to ponder the origins of your beef. You're in that quiet, purposeful space, the royal kitchen, surrounded by the subtle smells of ancient culinary work. Your task tonight centers on a particular dish, one that might sound a little unusual to modern ears, a 7-day fermented beef soup. It's not your quick weeknight dinner, that's for sure. This dish embodies a key aspect of ancient Korean cuisine and food management, the deliberate, careful process of fermentation. Forget everything you might associate with soup today, perhaps a comforting chicken noodle or a vibrant tomato bisque. This is something else entirely. The very name, fermented beef soup, tells you this dish involves a transformation, a slow change guided by time and microbes. It's not just boiling meat in water. It's about coaxing out flavors and textures through a process that takes an entire week before you even get to the simmering stage. It's like saying you're going to make a cake, but the first step is aging the flour for 7 days. A commitment, shall we say. The concept of fermentation itself, however, would be completely familiar to anyone living in ancient Korea. As we touched on briefly, fermentation was absolutely central to their diet. Think of the pillars of Korean cuisine: kimchi, soybean paste; doenjang, chili paste; gochujang, soy sauce; ganjang. These are all products of fermentation, using salt, thyme, and beneficial microorganisms to create complex flavors, preserve food, and make ingredients more digestible. This deep reliance on fermentation for staples and flavorings is a mainstream historical fact of traditional Korean cuisine, stretching back centuries. They were masters of the controlled microbial transformation, long before anyone knew what a microbe was. It was just magic, tasty, often very pungent magic. Applying this concept to beef might seem a bit more specific, but the principles are similar. Fermentation can do wonderful things to meat, when done correctly, keywords being correctly and when. It helps to break down tough muscle fibers, making the meat more tender. It can enhance the umami flavors, adding depth and richness that you wouldn't get from fresh meat alone. And, particularly important in the days before refrigeration, certain types of fermentation could act as a form of preservation, creating an environment, often through acidity or salt, that was inhospitable to harmful spoilage bacteria. So, this 7-day process isn't about letting the beef go bad. It's a controlled environment where specific types of beneficial microorganisms are encouraged to work their magic, transforming the raw beef into something else entirely. It's a delicate balance, requiring knowledge, cleanliness, within the limitations of the era, and careful monitoring. Too long, wrong conditions, and yes, you get spoilage. But just right, and you get a foundational ingredient for a soup with a depth of flavor that unfurls over 7 days of quiet waiting. It's like having tiny, invisible chefs working around the clock inside a pot. Hopefully, they have good references. What kind of flavor profile would this fermentation impart? It wouldn't just be a sourness like fermented vegetables. Meat fermentation, especially with certain starters or brines, can create tangy notes, deepen the savory umami, and add complexity that's hard to achieve otherwise. It's a more nuanced flavor than simply boiling fresh beef. Imagine the difference between fresh tofu and fermented bean paste, doenjang. They are related, but the flavor complexity is on entirely different levels. This soup would likely have a rich, layered taste, perhaps with a subtle tang that distinguishes it from a simple beef broth. The exact name or specific historical record of this precise 7-day fermented beef soup recipe in ancient Korean court documents might be elusive. Court recipes were sometimes guarded secrets, passed down through generations of court cooks, or recorded in documents that are no longer fully extant or deciphered. Historians still argue whether specific recipes for dishes like 7-day fermented beef soup were standardized across different periods of the Joseon or Goryeo dynasty, or if they evolved, adapted, or even varied significantly between different chief cooks or royal preferences. Was there one definitive way to make this soup, or were there variations? It's hard to pinpoint the exact lineage of every dish served to the king. So, while the practice of fermenting meat for flavor and preservation was known, the specific details of this particular 7-day beef soup might be reconstructed based on general culinary practices of the time. A quirky tidbit related to court food is the meticulous record-keeping that sometimes occurred, detailing not just the ingredients used, but also the quantities, the dates, and even which royal family member ate which dish. Imagine a court scribe diligently noting down day 3, beef soup fermentation proceeding as planned. Slight bubbling observed. The king ate 3 bowls of kimchi today. This level of detail underscores the importance of food, even potentially tracking the progress of our specific, slowly transforming soup. So, the dish isn't just beef soup. It's fermented beef soup, a designation that speaks volumes about its preparation and intended flavor. It represents a tradition of culinary skill, patience, and leveraging natural processes to create food fit for royalty. It requires foresight. You can't decide you want this soup and have it ready in an hour. You need to plan 7 days ahead. It's a dish that demands respect for time and transformation. You are part of bringing this concept to life. You are involved in the initial steps of setting this slow process in motion. It starts not with heat, but with careful handling of the raw ingredient and preparing the environment for those tiny, unseen flavor engineers to do their work. It's a quiet beginning to a process that will unfold patiently over the coming week. The air still carries those subtle, intriguing scents, hinting at the deep flavors that are yet to develop. Your focus, and our sleepy journey, is now on the source of that beef, the main ingredient that will undergo this week-long transformation. You've got the concept now, 7 days of quiet, microbial work to turn regular beef into something special for the king's table. But this process starts with the raw material, the beef itself. And in the ancient Korean court, the source of the meat wasn't just a butcher shop down the street. Oh no! Royal ingredients were often sourced with meticulous care, sometimes from dedicated suppliers or even royal farms, ensuring quality and control. This practice of sourcing specific, high-quality provisions for the royal household is a mainstream historical fact in many centralized ancient states, including Korean dynasties like Joseon and Goryeo. The king didn't just eat, he ate from a carefully managed supply chain. Imagine the cattle that provided this beef. Not just any cow would do. The animals destined for the royal kitchen would likely be selected from herds known for their health and quality. They might be raised on specific pastures, perhaps even supervised to ensure they were fed well and treated properly, at least, by the standards of the time. This wasn't just about ethics, it was about ensuring the meat was as good as possible. Happy cows, perhaps, made for happier kings. Or at least, better tasting soup. The sourcing process would involve officials responsible for procuring food supplies for the court. They wouldn't just buy a random cut of meat, they would likely inspect the animals, oversee the slaughtering process, which might happen at a dedicated facility, and ensure the meat was transported quickly and cleanly to the palace kitchens. Think of them as ancient royal food inspectors, making sure everything was up to snuff. No pressure, just the king's digestion resting on your shoulders. Korean native cattle, known as hanwoo, have a long history on the peninsula and would have been the most likely source of beef. These cattle are known for their marbling and flavor, qualities that would have been appreciated even in ancient times, though perhaps without the modern terminology. They were valued animals, used for labor as well as meat, so providing them for the court was a significant matter. When the beef arrived at the kitchen, it would likely be specific cuts deemed appropriate for soup, perhaps tougher cuts from the leg or shoulder that benefit from long, slow cooking and, in our case, fermentation. Marrow bones might also be included for richness, though our focus is on the meat itself for the fermentation step. A quirky tidbit is that certain colors of hanwoo cattle were traditionally preferred for specific purposes, including sacrifice or consumption. While the focus for regular consumption was on health and quality, there might have been subtle traditional preferences regarding the appearance of the animal selected for the royal table. Imagine trying to find a cow with the perfect shade of brown for the king's soup. Culinary selection criteria could get surprisingly specific. Historians still argue whether the royal court maintained dedicated, large-scale cattle farms specifically for the king's consumption, or if they primarily relied on procuring the best animals from private or provincial sources under strict quality control. Was the beef for the king's table raised entirely by the court, or just the best selected by the court? The logistics and scale of royal food production are complex topics with varying practices across different periods and dynasties. Imagine the raw beef arriving at the kitchen. It would be fresh, perhaps still warm if transported quickly from a nearby slaughtering area. The color would be a deep red, the texture firm. There would be the distinct, slightly bloody smell of raw meat, mingling oddly with the other kitchen aromas. This isn't meat that has been sitting around, it's prime quality, brought directly for the royal table. Handling this raw ingredient would require care. Even without a modern understanding of bacteria, experienced cooks knew that fresh meat needed to be handled properly to prevent spoilage, especially before any preservation method like fermentation began. Cleanliness, keeping the meat cool as much as possible, and processing it efficiently would be priorities. The beef would be prepared in specific ways depending on the dish. For our fermented soup, it would likely be cut into pieces suitable for both fermentation and eventual boiling. Not tiny cubes, but perhaps larger chunks that could withstand the 7-day process and then break down and tenderize during the long simmer. Think about the texture of the raw beef in your hands, cool, slightly slippery, firm yet yielding as you prepare it for cutting. The feel of the knife slicing through the muscle fibers. The quiet sounds of preparation, the thud of meat on the cutting board, the steady rhythm of the knife. It's physical work, focused and repetitive. This beef represents not just food, but resources, labor, and a managed system designed to provide the best for the highest person in the land. Its journey from pasture to plate, or rather, pasture to fermentation pot, is a testament to the complex logistics and importance placed on royal sustenance in ancient Korea. It's the starting point for our 7-day adventure in flavor transformation. The beef is sourced, selected for quality, and delivered to the royal kitchen. It sits there, raw and ready, waiting for the initial preparation steps that will set it on its path to becoming that complex, 7-day fermented soup. It's a simple ingredient, but one with a history and a specific destiny within the rigid culinary hierarchy of the court. And the next step is getting it ready for its week-long bath of transformation. No time to chew on the philosophy of beef provenance for too long. There's meat to prepare. The beef has arrived. It's been carefully sourced, selected for quality, and delivered to the royal kitchen. It sits there now, perhaps on a large wooden block or a stone slab, cool and substantial. Before it begins its week-long transformation in the fermentation pot, it needs some initial preparation. This isn't just throwing a piece of meat into a container. It involves cleaning, portioning, and possibly a preliminary treatment to ensure the fermentation process starts correctly. Your task is to handle this raw material, turning it from a butcher's cut into the first component of the king's slow-cooked soup. Imagine the raw beef before you. It's a large piece, maybe from the leg or shoulder, with muscle fibers visible, perhaps some fat and connective tissue. The color is a deep, healthy red. The surface might be slightly damp. The first step in preparing it for fermentation is cleaning. This doesn't involve soap, obviously. It means carefully rinsing the meat with clean water to remove any surface dirt or debris that might have accumulated during transport. Picture the process. You might take the large cut of beef and carry it to a basin or a trough filled with fresh water. The water is cool, perhaps drawn from a well or a stream supplying the palace. You immerse the meat, feeling its weight under the water. You gently rub the surface with your hands, washing away any dust or impurities. The water might turn slightly cloudy or reddish from the surface contact with the meat. This careful cleaning is a fundamental part of ancient food preparation, aiming for hygiene within the available means, a mainstream historical fact that basic cleaning was understood as important to health, especially for royal food. It's like giving your beef a quick shower before its big week. After rinsing, you lift the beef out of the water and place it back on the clean preparation surface. You might pat it dry with a clean cloth, or simply let excess water drain off. The surface of the meat now looks cleaner, its color vibrant against the wood or stone. Next comes portioning. The beef needs to be cut into pieces that are suitable for the fermentation vessel and will eventually work well in a soup. This isn't mincing or cubing for a quick stir-fry. These pieces need to be substantial enough to withstand a week-long fermentation without disintegrating, but small enough to fit into the fermentation pot and later to be easily consumed in soup. Imagine cutting against the grain, following the natural lines of the muscle. You'd use a sharp knife, likely made of iron or steel, with a sturdy handle. Feel the weight of the knife in your hand, the satisfying resistance as the blade slices through the muscle. The size of the pieces might be dictated by tradition or the specific recipe, perhaps palm-sized chunks or long strips. Consistency and size would be important for even fermentation and cooking later on. You focus on the task, the repetitive motion of cutting, the quiet sounds of the knife on the meat and the cutting board. Thud, slice, thud, slice. It's a simple, physical task, requiring attention but not complex thought. As you cut, you might also trim away excess fat or tough connective tissue, depending on the specific requirements of the recipe and the desired outcome for the soup. This trimming refines the cut, preparing the best parts of the muscle for the fermentation process. These trimmings wouldn't necessarily be wasted. They might be used for other less prestigious dishes or rendered for fat, demonstrating the efficiency of a large kitchen operation. Beyond just cleaning and cutting, there might be a preliminary step before the beef goes into the fermentation vessel. One plausible method, common in various meat fermentation practices, would be salting. Rubbing the pieces of beef with salt, or soaking them in a brine, a solution of salt and water, would help draw out moisture and create an initial environment that favors the desired fermentation microbes while inhibiting spoilage bacteria. Salt is a powerful preservative and a key ingredient in many fermented foods. This initial salting would kickstart the process, controlling the early microbial activity. Imagine taking handfuls of coarse salt and rubbing it over the surface of the cut beef, feeling the granules against the cool, damp meat. The salt adheres, beginning to draw out the moisture. The smell of the beef mixes with the sharp, clean scent of the salt. It's a tangible application of preservation knowledge. A quirky tidbit is that some ancient meat fermentation methods involved slightly pounding or scoring the surface of the meat before salting or brining. This was believed to help the salt or brine penetrate more effectively and speed up the initial stages of the process. Imagine gently hitting the surface of the beef chunks with a blunt object or making shallow cuts across the surface. It adds another small, manual step to the process, a detail born of empirical experience passed down through generations. It's like tenderizing it, but with a microbial goal in mind. Historians still argue whether the precise salinity level of the brine or the duration of the initial salting phase for fermented beef varied significantly between different regions, time periods, or even specific court kitchen practices in ancient Korea. Was there a universally accepted right amount of salt for a 7-day beef fermentation? Or did different cooks have their own preferred ratios and timings, leading to subtle variations in the final product? Reconstructing these exact procedural details from limited historical texts can be challenging. As you finish cleaning, cutting, and perhaps salting the beef, you arrange the pieces neatly. They are ready. They have been prepared with care, transformed from a large, raw cut into uniform pieces, treated to encourage the desired microbial magic. The physical work is simple, repetitive, requiring focus but not strain. The feel of the clean, slightly salty beef in your hands, the sight of the neatly piled pieces, it's a moment of quiet satisfaction before the long waiting period begins. This initial preparation is crucial. Get this wrong, use unclean meat, cut the pieces incorrectly, salt it improperly, and the fermentation could fail, resulting in spoiled meat rather than delicious soup. So, despite the simplicity of the actions, there is an underlying importance, a weight of responsibility in handling this key ingredient for the king's table. But you perform the tasks methodically, relying on the learned procedures, allowing the quiet repetition of the work to soothe your mind. The beef is ready. Its transformation awaits the environment of the fermentation vessel. The next step is placing these prepared pieces into the pot where they will spend the next 7 days. The quiet work of preparation is complete. The quiet waiting is about to begin. You've finished preparing the beef. The cuts are clean, portioned, perhaps lightly salted, and neatly waiting. They are ready for their long, quiet journey of transformation. But where will this journey take place? Not just anywhere. The container, the vessel in which the beef will ferment for 7 days, is crucial. It needs to be the right material, the right size, and prepared properly to create the ideal environment for those invisible microbial chefs to do their work. Imagine the vessel used in this ancient Korean court kitchen. It's not a plastic tub or a stainless steel pot. It would be a large, traditional earthenware pot, the kind known in Korea as onggi. These pots were, and still are, fundamental to Korean food storage and fermentation. They are typically made from a special clay mixed with sand, fired at high temperatures, and often finished with a natural ash glaze. Their shape can vary, some are round and bulbous, others taller and more cylindrical. This use of large, porous earthenware pots like onggi for fermentation and storage is a mainstream historical fact of traditional Korean culinary practices, central to making everything from kimchi to soy sauce. They were the ancient world's fermentation workhorses, indispensable tools in any kitchen serious about flavor and preservation. Feel the surface of the onggi pot you would use for this beef fermentation. It's heavy, substantial, made of thick clay. The texture is likely rough on the unglazed parts, perhaps smoother where the natural ash glaze has dripped down the sides during firing, creating patterns that look almost accidental but are the hallmark of traditional craftsmanship. It might feel cool to the touch, the clay absorbing the ambient temperature. Its size would be significant, large enough to hold a considerable amount of beef to feed the royal household, plus the necessary liquid. You wouldn't be fermenting a single steak, you'd be preparing a batch. Imagine its wide mouth, its curved sides, its stable base. The key characteristic of onggi that makes it so suitable for fermentation is its subtle porosity. While fired at high temperatures, the clay allows for microporous ventilation. This means air can pass through the walls of the pot, allowing the contents to breathe. This is vital for many types of fermentation, allowing gases produced by the microbes, like carbon dioxide, to escape and a small amount of fresh air to enter, creating a stable environment that is less likely to become anaerobic, without air, in a way that encourages spoilage. It's like the pot has tiny lungs, quietly regulating the atmosphere within for the benefit of the fermenting food. Without this breathability, your beef might just rot instead of ferment. Not a good look for royal soup. Before using the onggi pot, it would need to be meticulously cleaned. In a royal kitchen, cleanliness was paramount, even if the methods were different from today. The pot would be thoroughly washed, perhaps scrubbed with brushes made from natural fibers, and rinsed repeatedly with clean water. It might then be dried in the sun to ensure no residual moisture or unwanted microbes are present. This careful preparation of the vessel is crucial. Introducing the wrong bacteria at the start could ruin the entire batch. Imagine the elbow grease involved in scrubbing out a massive clay pot, ensuring every nook and cranny is spotless, by ancient standards. It's not glamorous work, but essential. A quirky tidbit about onggi fermentation is that older pots were often considered more valuable for starting ferments. They were believed to harbor beneficial colonies of microorganisms within their porous walls, providing a natural starter culture that could help guide the fermentation process towards a successful outcome. It's like having a sourdough starter that lives in the pot itself. So, a well-used onggi in a court kitchen might be a prized possession, carefully maintained and reserved for specific, important ferments like the king's beef soup. Imagine inheriting a massive, ancient onggi pot, revered not just for its age, but for the invisible microbial community it hosts. It adds a layer of living history to the cooking process. Historians still argue whether the specific composition of the clay or the firing techniques used to produce onggi pots for the royal court differed significantly from those used for common households, or if the primary difference was simply the size and perhaps the aesthetic finish. Were there secret royal pottery techniques that made their onggi exceptionally good for fermentation? Or was a high-quality onggi just a high-quality onggi, regardless of its ultimate destination? The transfer of knowledge between royal workshops and civilian production is an area of ongoing scholarly debate. The location of the onggi pots during fermentation was also important. They were often kept outdoors or in a well-ventilated storage area, exposed to the elements but sheltered from direct sun and extreme temperature fluctuations. The seasonal temperature variations would influence the speed and nature of the fermentation, a factor the ancient cooks would have understood through experience, even if they didn't understand the microbiology. A warmer season might mean a faster ferment, a colder season a slower one. Our 7-day recipe implies a standard time, but perhaps this was adjusted slightly based on the ambient temperature in the fermentation area. Picture the fermentation area in the royal kitchen complex. It might be a courtyard or a shed specifically designated for onggi pots. Rows of these large clay vessels sitting quietly, overseeing the slow transformation of kimchi, sauces, and yes, your batch of beef. The air in this area might have a distinct, slightly tangy, fermented smell, a blend of all the different processes happening within the pots. Choosing the right onggi for the beef fermentation is part of your task. You would select a pot of appropriate size that is clean and in good condition, perhaps one known for its reliable fermentation history. You check for cracks or damage that could compromise the process. The pot is a partner in the fermentation, providing the stable, breathable home where the beef will rest and change. Holding the prepared beef in your hands, you stand ready before the chosen onggi pot. Its wide mouth waits to receive the ingredients. The pot itself feels solid, ancient, capable of holding not just physical contents, but the potential for complex flavors to develop over time. It represents patience, tradition, and the subtle art of harnessing natural processes. The stage is set. The vessel is ready. The next step is introducing the beef and the necessary liquid to the pot, setting the 7-day clock ticking on this quiet, culinary transformation. The container is selected. Now, time to fill it. You've got the carefully prepared pieces of beef, perhaps lightly salted, ready to go. And you have the sturdy, porous onggi pot, clean and waiting. The stage is almost set for the 7-day transformation. But the beef can't just sit there dry. It needs an environment, a liquid medium, to facilitate the fermentation process. This liquid isn't just a casual addition, it's a crucial component, carefully prepared to encourage the right kind of microbial activity and discourage the wrong kind. Imagine preparing this liquid. The most common and effective base for many types of fermentation, including meat and vegetables in Korea, is a brine, a solution of salt and water. Salt is absolutely essential here. It does more than just add flavor, it plays a critical role in controlling the microbial landscape. Salt inhibits the growth of many harmful bacteria that cause spoilage, while allowing certain beneficial, salt-tolerant bacteria, often lactic acid bacteria, though meat fermentation can involve others, to thrive and perform the desired transformation. This fundamental role of salt in fermentation and food preservation is a mainstream historical fact understood across many cultures for millennia. It was nature's ancient security guard, keeping the bad guys out while the good guys got to work. So, the liquid you are preparing is primarily salt water. But the concentration of the salt is vital. Too little salt, and you risk letting the spoilage bacteria take over, leading to putrefaction. Too much salt, and you might inhibit all microbial activity, including the beneficial fermentation you want. Finding that sweet spot, the right ratio of salt to water, is crucial for a successful 7-day ferment. This concentration would likely be something determined by long experience and tradition, a piece of knowledge passed down through generations of court cooks. It's not a recipe you want to eyeball. A pinch? Or was it a handful? Let's just wing it. Probably not the approach for the king's soup. How would this brine be prepared? You would need a quantity of clean water, likely heated slightly to help the salt dissolve more easily. Then, you would measure out the appropriate amount of salt. Salt in ancient Korea would have come from various sources, perhaps evaporated from seawater or mined. Its quality and purity could vary, which would be another factor to consider. You would add the salt to the water, perhaps stirring it with a clean wooden paddle until it is fully dissolved, creating a clear, salty liquid. Imagine the sound of the salt granules dropping into the water, the faint swirling as you stir, the liquid slowly becoming dense with dissolved salt. Beyond just salt and water, were there other components to this fermentation liquid? Possibly. Some traditional fermentation practices involved adding a starter culture from a previous successful batch to seed the new ferment with the right microorganisms. This could be a small amount of brine from a finished ferment, or perhaps even a bit of sediment from a reliable onggi pot. Remember that quirky tidbit about beneficial microbes living in the pot walls? Adding a starter would help to ensure the desired fermentation process begins quickly and reliably, giving the beneficial bacteria a head start over potential contaminants. It's like giving your tiny microbial chefs a little help getting started in their new kitchen. This practice of using starters from previous ferments is a quirky tidbit found in various traditional fermentation methods worldwide, a form of microbial inheritance. Historians still argue whether the use of specific starter cultures was a standardized practice for meat fermentation in ancient Korean court kitchens, or if a strong brine and the natural microbes present on the beef and in the onggi pot were generally considered sufficient to initiate the desired fermentation. Were there carefully maintained mother cultures for beef ferments, similar to how starters were kept for sauces or beverages? Or was it a simpler process relying more on the inherent microbial environment? The explicit documentation on meat fermentation starters is less common than for, say, grain ferments, leaving room for scholarly debate. Once the brine or fermentation liquid is prepared, salt dissolved, perhaps a starter added, it's ready to be combined with the beef in the onggi pot. This liquid will surround the beef, creating the specific chemical and microbial environment needed for the 7-day transformation. It will help exclude oxygen from the surface of the meat, favoring certain types of fermentation. Imagine carefully pouring the prepared liquid over the beef pieces already placed in the onggi. Hear the sound as the liquid splashes gently against the clay walls and covers the meat, a quiet, gurgling sound. See the liquid level rise, fully immersing the beef. The pieces of meat might shift slightly as the liquid surrounds them. You pour until the beef is completely submerged, ensuring no parts are exposed to the air, as exposure could lead to spoilage rather than fermentation. The liquid fills the pot, covering the beef like a salty, microbial blanket. The temperature of the liquid and the environment where the onggi pot will be stored are also important factors influencing the fermentation speed and outcome. The ancient cooks would have chosen a suitable location. Remember that well-ventilated storage area, based on the time of year and the desired pace of the 7-day process. Consistent temperature helps ensure a more predictable ferment. The act of combining the beef and the liquid feels significant. It's the moment the process truly begins. The inert ingredients are brought together in the carefully chosen vessel, setting the stage for the slow, invisible work that will unfold over the next week. The smell of the salty liquid mixes with the faint smell of the beef. It's a smell of potential, of transformation waiting to happen. This fermentation liquid is the unseen engine of the soup's future flavor. It provides the salt for preservation and flavor, the water for the microbes to live and work in, and perhaps the starter to guide the process. It's a simple liquid, but its composition and interaction with the beef in the onggi pot are key to turning raw meat into the flavorful, tender foundation of a royal dish. Without this carefully prepared liquid, there is 7-day fermentation, and thus, no fermented beef soup. You've poured the liquid. The beef is submerged. The onggi pot holds its contents quietly. The initial steps of preparation are complete. The stage is set for the long wait, the 7 days during which this quiet transformation will occur, mostly unseen, guided by the conditions you've just created. The liquid has been prepared and added. Now, the pot needs to be secured, and placed in its resting spot for the week ahead. The slow, sleepy journey into the depths of ancient Korean fermentation is truly underway. The fermentation liquid, that carefully measured brine, sits ready in the onggi pot, or perhaps waiting in a separate container to be poured over the beef once it's placed. You have the prepared pieces of beef, rinsed, cut, maybe lightly salted, sitting nearby, waiting for their new temporary home. Now comes the step that truly initiates the process, combining the two in the fermentation vessel. Imagine holding a handful of the prepared beef pieces. They are cool, slightly firm, perhaps a little slick from their rinsing or initial salting. You approach the onggi pot, that large, sturdy earthenware vessel that will be the beef's domicile for the next week. The pot feels solid, its wide mouth inviting. You look down into it. If the liquid is already in the pot, you see the clear, salty water waiting. If not, you see the bare clay interior, clean and ready. You begin placing the beef into the pot. Not just dropping it carelessly, but likely arranging the pieces with some thought. You want to ensure they will be fully submerged by the liquid and packed relatively well, minimizing air pockets between the pieces once the liquid is added, or ensuring they are fully coated if the liquid is already in the pot. Imagine gently lowering the pieces, one by one or perhaps a few at a time, into the pot. Feel their weight as you transfer them. Hear the soft thud as they settle against the bottom or against the other pieces. The beef pieces start to fill the lower part of the onggi. You arrange them, making sure they lie relatively flat or interlock slightly, creating a solid layer. This step requires attention to detail, ensuring the foundation for a successful fermentation is laid properly. It's like carefully packing a suitcase for a long trip. You want everything to fit just right and arrive in good condition. The beef is embarking on its own journey, albeit a stationary one, inside this pot. If the brine wasn't already in the pot, now is the time to add it. You take the container of prepared salty liquid and begin pouring it over the beef. Hear the sound as the liquid flows down, swirling around the beef pieces, filling the spaces between them. The color of the liquid might change slightly as it interacts with the raw meat, becoming tinged with pink. You pour until the beef is completely submerged, ensuring every piece is covered by the brine. This full submersion is critical. Any part of the beef left exposed to the air could spoil rather than ferment. The liquid acts as a protective barrier, creating the necessary anaerobic or near anaerobic environment for the desirable microbes to work their magic. This process of combining the beef and the fermentation liquid in a suitable vessel to initiate a controlled microbial transformation is the core action of setting up the ferment. It's the critical step where the environment for the next 7 days is established. This method of preserving and tenderizing meat through brining and fermentation in earthenware vessels is a practice with roots in various ancient cultures, adapted over time. The specific combination of beef, salt brine, and onggi pot is a piece of that larger historical tradition of food preservation through controlled microbial action, a mainstream historical fact in the development of various fermented meat products globally. As the last of the liquid is poured, observe the pot's contents. The beef pieces are now submerged in the salty liquid, sitting quietly in the onggi. The air above the liquid might hold a faint, complex scent, the raw smell of beef mingling with the sharp, clean scent of salt. The process isn't visibly dramatic, but you know that beneath the surface of that liquid, a slow, invisible transformation is already beginning. Microbes are starting to awaken or become active, sensing the new environment you've created for them. A quirky tidbit related to this stage is that in some traditional fermentation practices, a clean weight might be placed on top of the ingredients to keep them fully submerged in the liquid throughout the process. This could be a clean stone or a specially made ceramic disc. This ensures that as gases are produced or the ingredients shift, everything remains below the surface of the brine, preventing exposure to air and potential spoilage. Imagine carefully placing a heavy, clean stone on top of the beef pieces, pressing them down gently into the salty liquid. It's a simple, ingenious technique to maintain the integrity of the ferment. Historians still argue whether the specific type of weight, if any, used, the exact level of brine above the meat, or the initial temperature of the ingredients in brine had a significant, prescribed role in influencing the outcome of meat fermentation in ancient Korean court kitchens, or if these were details left more to the experienced judgment of the head cook based on seasonal variations or the quality of the ingredients. Was there a standard weight-to-beef ratio, or a required brine level measured with precision? Or was it more about the practical knowledge of make sure it stays under the water? The precise levels of standardization in these detailed steps are often difficult to ascertain from historical records. The pot sits heavy now, filled with its contents. It represents a promise of future flavor, a week of waiting and quiet change. The physical work of preparation and combination is complete. You've taken the raw ingredients and placed them in the controlled environment where the magic of fermentation can occur. It's a step that requires trust in the process, trust in the quality of your ingredients, trust in the onggi pot, and trust in the invisible microbes that will do the work. There's a quiet satisfaction in knowing you've set the stage correctly. The beef is in the pot, covered by the brine. The potential is sealed within the clay walls. The air around the pot feels ordinary, but you know that inside, a miniature ecosystem is beginning to hum with activity, slowly breaking down the beef and building up those desired flavors. It's a process that happens without heat, without fanfare, just quiet, patient transformation over time. You might run your hand over the cool, rough surface of the onggi pot one last time before moving to the next step. It feels solid, grounding. It holds the future of the soup within its walls. The air is still the same mix of kitchen scents, but the subtle tang of fermentation might already feel just a tiny bit more present now that the process has officially begun. The beef is in the vessel, the liquid is added. The combination is complete. Now, the vessel needs to be secured and placed in its resting spot for the long wait to begin. The quietest part of the process is about to unfold. The beef pieces rest submerged in the salty brine within the onggi pot. The liquid has been poured, the ingredients combined. The potential for a week of transformative fermentation is now contained within those clay walls. But it's not enough to simply fill the pot. It needs to be secured, sealed off from the outside world just enough to control the process within, while still allowing the onggi's natural properties to work. This act of sealing is crucial, protecting the ferment from contamination or unwanted pests while regulating the air exchange. Imagine the lid for the onggi pot. It would be a matching clay lid, designed to fit snugly over the wide mouth of the vessel. Pick up the lid. It might be domed or flat, heavy, and made of the same earthy clay as the pot itself. You position the lid over the opening, aligning it so it sits correctly. It covers the contents, but it's not necessarily airtight just yet. The subtle porosity of the onggi clay allows for some natural air exchange through the walls, which is desirable, but you don't want dust, insects, or other airborne contaminants falling directly into the brine. To create a proper seal for fermentation, a common method in traditional Korean practice, and across many ancient food preservation techniques, was to use a layer of cloth or paper secured around the rim of the pot before placing the lid. This provides a physical barrier. Imagine taking a clean piece of coarse cloth, perhaps made of hemp or cotton, or a sheet of traditional Korean paper, onggi. You carefully place this cloth or paper over the mouth of the onggi, pressing it down around the edges. This material is often chosen because it's breathable, allowing necessary gases produced during fermentation to escape while filtering the air coming in. It's like putting a breathable bandage over the pot. Using natural materials like cloth or paper beneath the lid to seal fermentation vessels is a mainstream historical fact of food preservation in ancient Korea and many other cultures. It created a protective, semi-permeable barrier essential for controlled fermentation. Once the cloth or paper is in place, stretched taut over the opening, you would lower the heavy clay lid back down on top of it. The weight of the lid helps to press the cloth or paper against the rim, creating a more secure barrier. You might adjust it, pressing down around the edges, ensuring there are no significant gaps. The cloth might crinkle or fold slightly under the weight of the lid. To further secure the seal and hold the cloth or paper firmly in place, you might tie a piece of cord or rope tightly around the neck of the onggi pot, just below the rim and over the edge of the cloth and lid. Feel the rough texture of the cord in your hands as you wrap it around the pot, pulling it taut, tying it off securely. This keeps everything in place, ensuring the lid and the cloth barrier don't shift, especially if the pot is moved. It's the ancient equivalent of putting a tight lid on a jar and maybe adding some plastic wrap for good measure, but with more natural materials and certainly more effort. This sealing process is crucial for controlling the environment within the pot. It prevents unwanted external elements from entering and disrupting the delicate microbial balance you're trying to cultivate. It also helps maintain the liquid level by reducing evaporation, while still allowing the necessary gas exchange through the pot's porous walls and the breathable cover material. It's a careful balance between protection and allowing the ferment to breathe. Once the onggi pot is sealed, it's heavy, filled with beef and brine, topped with its lid and secured. It's ready to be moved to its designated resting place for the next 7 days. This isn't just any corner of the kitchen. The location matters. It needs to be placed somewhere stable, where it won't be easily disturbed, and where the temperature conditions are suitable for the fermentation process. Imagine carrying or moving the heavy onggi pot. You might need help from another kitchen worker. These large pots, when full, could be quite heavy. Feel the weight as you lift it, the smooth or rough texture of the clay under your hands. You walk carefully, mindful of the precious contents and the need to avoid jolting the pot. The destination is likely the fermentation area we imagined earlier, perhaps a quiet corner of the courtyard, a dedicated shed, or a well-ventilated storage room. You look for the right spot. It needs to be level, so the pot sits steadily. It should be away from direct sunlight, which could cause temperature fluctuations and damage the pot or the contents. It needs good ventilation, allowing air to circulate around the porous onggi walls. And it needs to be a place where the pot won't be accidentally knocked over or disturbed by other kitchen activities over the next week. Imagine surveying the potential spots, assessing the light, the airflow, the stability of the ground. You choose a spot that feels right, a quiet corner where the pot can sit undisturbed and the slow work of fermentation can proceed in peace. It's like finding the perfect parking spot, but for a week, and if you get it wrong, your car turns into, well, let's not think about that. You gently lower the heavy onggi pot into place. Feel its weight settle onto the ground. Adjust its position slightly to ensure it's stable. The pot now sits there, a quiet sentinel in its designated spot, its precious contents sealed within, beginning their slow transformation. A quirky tidbit about placing fermentation pots is that in some traditional beliefs, the location of the pot relative to the sun's movement or even certain auspicious directions could be considered important for a successful ferment. While practicality regarding temperature and light was undoubtedly the main factor, there might have been subtle traditional practices or superstitions influencing the final placement of important fermentation vessels like the one holding the king's beef. Imagine subtly adjusting the pot's orientation, hoping it faces the cosmically correct direction for optimal microbial activity. Historians still argue whether the ideal temperature range for meat fermentation in ancient Korean court kitchens was actively managed beyond simply choosing a suitable storage location, or if the cook simply accepted the natural temperature fluctuations of the chosen spot and adjusted the fermentation time accordingly. Were there efforts to keep the fermentation area within a very specific temperature window, perhaps by covering the pots or using other methods? Or was the 7-day period more of an average, extended during colder seasons and possibly shortened slightly during warmer ones? The level of environmental control they could achieve and its impact on specific fermentation times is a point of scholarly discussion. The pot sits, sealed, placed in its quiet spot. It asks for nothing but time. The physical tasks are complete. The work now transitions from human hands to invisible microbes, guided by the environment you've created within and around the onggi. The air in this area might start to carry the very faint, subtle tang of early fermentation, a smell that will deepen and change over the coming days. You take a step back, looking at the sealed pot. It represents patience, tradition, and the quiet promise of future flavor. It will sit here for 7 days, undergoing its transformation, mostly unobserved from the outside. The bustling activity of the rest of the kitchen continues elsewhere, but in this corner, time slows down, measured in days, not minutes. The pot is sealed, the location chosen. The stage is set for the long wait. The first few days of this quiet, transformative process are about to begin, mostly unseen, entirely unheard, unless you listen very, very closely to the subtle work happening within that humble clay pot. It's a quiet beginning, a slow unwinding, perfectly designed to ease you into a state of deep, restful calm. The onggi pot sits in its designated quiet corner. It's been sealed, cloth or paper secured beneath the heavy clay lid, perhaps tied with a cord. The prepared beef is submerged in the salty brine inside. You placed it there yesterday, or perhaps the day before. Time has begun its slow work. We are now somewhere in the span of fermentation days 1 and 2. Externally, nothing much seems to be happening. The pot is just sitting there. Heavy, silent, containing its promise. Imagine approaching the pot now, on this first or second day. The air around it might smell much the same as it did when you sealed it, a mix of the clay, the faint saltiness, maybe the subtle raw scent of beef. There's no dramatic bubbling, no strong, pungent aroma signaling vigorous activity. At this initial stage, the changes happening within are mostly invisible, quiet, operating on a microscopic level. It's like waiting for a very slow cooker to start warming up. Very, very slow. Inside the pot, however, things are beginning to stir. The salt in the brine is drawing more moisture out of the beef, penetrating the tissues. This initial osmotic effect is key to the process. More importantly, the microorganisms are starting to get acquainted with their new environment. The salt-tolerant bacteria, the ones you want to cultivate for fermentation, are becoming active. They are beginning to feed on the natural sugars and other compounds present in the beef and the liquid. Their numbers are still low, their activity subtle, but the process has begun. This initial phase, where beneficial microbes begin to proliferate in a salty environment, is a fundamental step in many fermentation processes, a mainstream historical fact that underlies food preservation through controlled microbial growth. They're settling in, unpacking their tiny microbial bags. You might observe the liquid level. Has it changed at all? Maybe very slightly, as the salt pulls more water out of the beef and potentially some minor evaporation occurs through the porous walls and cloth cover. The color might still be relatively clear, perhaps a pale pink or reddish hue from contact with the meat. There might be no visible signs of gas production yet, no bubbles rising to the surface. It is a period of quiet colonization and initial growth for the microbial community. What would you, as a kitchen worker, do during these first couple of days? Probably not much directly with the pot itself. Interference at this stage could disrupt the delicate balance. Your task is more about observation and patience. You might walk by the fermentation area, glancing at the onggi pot, checking its surroundings. Is it still in the right spot? Has anything disturbed it? Is the temperature in the area stable? It's a kind of passive monitoring, a quiet guardianship over the sleeping ferment. Imagine walking past, slowing your steps, looking at the pot, maybe touching its cool clay surface briefly. It feels inert, yet you know life is stirring within. A quirky tidbit related to monitoring early fermentation is the reliance on very subtle sensory cues by experienced ancient cooks. They might listen closely to the pot, perhaps even placing an ear near the lid, trying to detect any faint sounds of activity within, perhaps the softest possible hiss of gas escaping through the cloth or the porous clay. Sounds imperceptible to an untrained ear. Or they might develop a keen sense of smell, able to detect the very first, faint changes in the aroma around the pot that indicate the right kind of microbial work is beginning. A smell that is different from simple spoilage. It's like being a microbial whisperer, tuning into the subtlest signals from the pot. Historians still argue whether there were specific, codified checks performed on fermentation vessels during the first couple of days in ancient Korean court kitchens, or if this period was largely treated as a simple waiting game before more active monitoring began later in the week. Was there a required daily observation routine, checking temperature or potential early signs? Or did the strict 7-day protocol mean they simply trusted the process and waited until day 3 or 4 for the first serious check? The level of prescribed vigilance in these initial, subtle stages is a point of scholarly debate, often based on interpreting general guidelines for food preservation. For you, the experience of these first 2 days is one of quiet anticipation and trust. You've done your part, prepared the beef, mixed the brine, filled and sealed the onggi, placed it in the right spot. Now, nature and microbes are taking over. It's a reminder that not all cooking happens over a fire. Some of the most profound transformations occur slowly, silently, without direct heat. The air in the fermentation area is still calm, perhaps carrying only the very faintest hint of something changing, something moving subtly away from raw ingredients towards a more complex state. The silence of the process is striking. No bubbling sounds like boiling soup. No sizzling like meat on a grill. Just the stillness of the pot, sitting there patiently. This lack of immediate sensory feedback can be its own form of sleepy monotony. You know things are happening, important things for the flavor of the king's soup, but they are happening on a scale and at a speed that are hard to perceive with your normal senses. It requires a different kind of attention, patient, trusting, willing to wait for the slow reveal. Imagine ending your day, perhaps after more hours of labor or prayer, and taking one last look at the fermentation pot before settling down for the night. It sits there in the dim light, a shape in the darkness, a vessel of quiet transformation. The air around it feels cool, still. You breathe in, trying to catch any subtle scent, listening for any faint sound. Nothing dramatic. Just the profound silence of the ancient kitchen settling into the night, with the onggi pot holding its secret, slowly working towards its 7-day goal. These first couple of days are the least visibly exciting part of the 7-day journey. They are the foundation, the slow build-up. The microbes are multiplying, the salt is doing its work, the environment is stabilizing. It's the quiet hum before the more noticeable activity begins. It's the ultimate exercise in delayed gratification, waiting a whole week for a bowl of soup. And focusing on this very quiet, very slow beginning is perhaps the most effective way to ease your mind and prepare you for your own quiet rest. The pot sits. The clock is ticking, slowly, silently. Days 1 and 2 are quietly passing. The transformation will continue, deepening over the coming days, subtly changing the contents within that simple clay pot. 2 more days have passed. It's now somewhere around fermentation day 3 or 4. You approach the onggi pot again, sitting patiently in its quiet corner of the fermentation area. The subtle shifts that began in the first couple of days are starting to become just a little bit more apparent now. It's still not a dramatic explosion of activity, but if you pay close attention, you might notice some very subtle changes. Imagine leaning closer to the pot. Breathe in the air around the lid, the cloth cover. The smell is likely different now than it was on day 1. That initial raw scent of beef mixed with salt has probably started to transform. There might be a faint, slightly tangy or sour aroma, perhaps with a developing savory note. This smell is a crucial indicator that the fermentation is progressing as desired. It's the scent of those beneficial microbes actively working, breaking down the beef and producing new compounds. It's not the smell of decay, it's the smell of controlled transformation. If it smelled truly foul, you'd know something had gone wrong, and this batch would be destined for something other than the king's soup, and probably discreetly disposed of. But the right smell is a quiet promise of flavor. It's like smelling bread dough after a few hours. It's got that distinct, slightly yeasty tang of fermentation happening. If you were to peer very closely under the edge of the lid or through the cloth cover, without disturbing the seal too much, you might see a few very tiny bubbles rising slowly through the brine. These bubbles are likely carbon dioxide gas, a byproduct of the microbial activity. It's not the vigorous fizzing of a carbonated drink, it's a gentle, almost lazy ascent of small gas pockets from the depths of the brine. This subtle gas production is another sign that the fermentation is underway. Observing these visual cues, changes in smell and subtle bubbling, were practical ways ancient cooks monitored the progress of fermentation processes. This reliance on sensory observation to gauge microbial activity is a mainstream historical fact, the ancient world's version of lab testing, but using your nose and eyes instead of microscopes. Inside the pot, the beneficial bacteria are now much more active. They've multiplied significantly and are getting down to the serious work of breaking down the beef's proteins and fats into smaller molecules. This proteolysis, protein breakdown, and lipolysis, fat breakdown, is what tenderizes the meat and releases or creates compounds that contribute to the soup's eventual deep, complex flavor profile, those wonderful umami notes. They might also be producing organic acids, which contribute to a tangy taste and further inhibit the growth of undesirable bacteria. It's like an internal construction crew, demolishing the raw beef structure and building something more delicious in its place. They're probably unionized, working steadily towards that 7-day deadline. During these middle days, a skilled ancient court cook would likely engage in more active monitoring than in the initial phase. They would check the smell and visual cues more regularly. They might also gently check the tension of the cord holding the lid to ensure the seal is still secure. Any signs of unusual activity, excessive gas production, a truly off smell, or changes in the liquid appearance, like cloudiness that looks wrong, would be cause for concern. Their experience would tell them if the ferment was progressing correctly or if something was amiss. This wasn't guesswork. It was a honed skill based on generations of practice. A quirky tidbit related to monitoring fermentation is the practice, in some traditions, of even tasting the brine very carefully during the process, using a clean utensil, one hopes, especially in a royal kitchen. This would be done to check the salinity level and the developing flavor profile. The taste of the brine would change over the days, becoming tangier or more complex as the fermentation progressed. It's a bit risky from a contamination standpoint, perhaps, but provided direct sensory feedback on the internal chemical changes. Imagine dipping a clean chopstick into the brine, just a tiny drop on your tongue. Salty, yes, but is that the right kind of developing tang? Only an experienced palate would know. Historians still argue whether the monitoring process for fermented meats in ancient Korean court kitchens involved strictly defined criteria and scheduled checks, or if it relied more on the intuitive judgment and accumulated experience of the head cook who would decide when and how to check based on environmental factors and the specific batch. Was there a written log of daily observations? Or was it more a case of chef says it smells about right on day 4? The degree of formal protocol versus experienced improvisation is often a debated point when reconstructing ancient culinary practices. As you observe the pot on day 3 or 4, the silence remains the dominant feature. The subtle changes in smell and appearance are quiet indicators of the invisible work happening inside. You might touch the clay surface, it still feels cool, solid, containing the slow transformation. The air around the pot carries that developing aroma, the first real olfactory hint of the complex flavors that this patient waiting will unlock. It's a smell of controlled change, a smell of food becoming something more than its original components. The passage of these middle days reinforces the theme of patience that is central to this recipe. You cannot rush fermentation. You cannot force the microbes to work faster, or rather, attempting to do so would likely ruin the ferment. It requires allowing time, temperature, and the ingredients themselves to follow their natural, slow course. Your role is one of gentle oversight, ensuring the conditions remain right and waiting for the process to unfold. It's a lesson in relinquishing control, trusting in unseen processes. The quietness of this stage is profound. While other parts of the kitchen might be busy with immediate cooking, this corner dedicated to fermentation is a haven of stillness. The only activity is microscopic, silent, slow. It's the perfect illustration of boring history, focusing on a process that takes days to show subtle progress, where the main action is invisible and inaudible. These middle days are crucial. The initial setup is complete, and the active transformation is now underway. The flavor development is picking up pace. The beef is slowly tenderizing, its complex molecules being broken down into simpler, more savory forms. The pot sits, a silent laboratory, preparing its contents for the next stage, the final days of fermentation and eventually, the heat of the soup pot. The air feels heavy with the promise of developed flavor. The silence is punctuated only by your own breathing and the very faint, almost imagined, sounds of microbial activity within the clay walls. Days 3 and 4 are passing slowly, deliberately. The fermentation continues its quiet, relentless march towards day 7. You've endured the quiet vigilance of the first few days, observing subtle changes, trusting in the unseen work within the onggi pot. Now, you've reached the final stretch, fermentation days 5, 6, and finally, day 7. The end of the waiting is in sight. The transformation within the pot is now much more pronounced, its progress less a matter of subtle observation and more a noticeable reality. Imagine approaching the fermentation area on one of these final days. The air around the onggi pot carries a distinct, more powerful aroma than before. That faint tang from day 3 or 4 has deepened, intensified. It's a complex smell, tangy, savory, perhaps with a certain richness that wasn't present in the raw beef. It's the smell of successful fermentation, of proteins and fats having been significantly broken down, of flavor compounds having developed and matured over the week. This intensified, complex aroma is a key indicator that the fermentation is nearing completion and developing the desired flavor profile for the soup. Your nose becomes a critical tool in the ancient kitchen at this stage. It's like being a wine connoisseur, but for smelly beef brine. If you were to carefully lift the lid just slightly, or peer closely through the cloth cover, minimizing disturbance, you would likely see more visible signs of activity. There might be a noticeable layer of foam or bubbles on the surface of the brine, evidence of more vigorous gas production. The liquid itself might have changed appearance. It could be cloudier, perhaps a deeper color. The beef pieces might look different too. They might appear softer, slightly lighter in color, or even have changed their position slightly within the liquid due to the gas production. These visible cues provide further confirmation that the microbial transformation has been extensive. These visual and olfactory signals are how ancient cooks determined if the fermentation was progressing correctly and, crucially, if it was ready. There wasn't a timer that beeped after exactly 168 hours regardless of other factors. While 7 days is the recipe's name, the actual duration might have been slightly adjusted based on the temperature in the fermentation area and these sensory cues. Knowing when the fermentation was just right, optimally flavored and tenderized without veering into spoilage, required skill and experience. This reliance on home sensory evaluation, smell, sight, sometimes even taste, to determine the readiness of fermented foods is a mainstream historical fact across various traditional cuisines. Your senses were your laboratory equipment. Inside the pot, the beneficial microbes have completed the bulk of their work. The beef is significantly more tender than when it went in, its texture altered by the enzymatic activity of the microbes. The complex flavor compounds have been generated, infusing the meat and the brine with that deep umami and tang. The environment is stable, preserved by the salt and the beneficial microbial activity. It's reached its peak state of fermentation for this specific purpose. Any longer, and the flavors might become too intense, or the risk of undesirable microbial activity could increase depending on the exact conditions. 7 days is the sweet spot, the culmination of this quiet, transformative process. A quirky tidbit related to checking readiness might involve the subtle sound the ferment makes when gently disturbed. Some experienced fermenters can distinguish the sound of a healthy, active ferment, perhaps a faint hiss or bubble sound, from a sluggish or spoiled one. Imagine tapping the side of the onggi pot very gently or listening as you carefully lift the lid. The faint sounds could provide clues to the microbial life within. It's like listening to the heartbeat of your soup ingredient. Historians still argue whether the criteria for determining the exact point of completion for meat fermentation in ancient Korean court kitchens relied more heavily on a fixed time frame, like the 7 days specified, or on the subjective judgment of the chief cook based on sensory evaluation, potentially overriding the time if the conditions caused the ferment to develop faster or slower. Was day 7 a hard rule, or a guideline that could be adjusted based on the smell and appearance? The balance between codified time and experienced intuition in ancient recipes is often a point of scholarly debate. As you make these observations on day 5, 6, or 7, there's a sense of satisfaction. The waiting is almost over. The process has unfolded as intended. The quiet stillness of the fermentation area feels different now, charged with the presence of this fully developed ferment. The aroma around the pot is no longer just a promise, it's a reality, a deep, complex smell that hints at the rich soup to come. The anticipation builds subtly. The focus shifts from patient waiting to preparing for the next stage, cooking. The fermentation is the foundation, but the heat of the soup pot will complete the transformation, tenderizing the beef further and blending its unique fermented flavors with other ingredients. You know that soon, this quiet pot will yield its contents to the bustle and heat of the cooking fire. The beef inside is no longer just raw meat. It is fermented beef, fundamentally changed by its week-long soak in the brine. Its texture is softer, its flavor profile significantly altered. It is ready for the next step in its journey to the king's table. The onggi pot has served its purpose for this phase. It has been the silent laboratory, the patient vessel of transformation. Its work, for now, is complete. You might touch the cool, earthy surface of the pot one last time before moving on to the final steps. Feel its weight, its solidity. It has quietly held and nurtured this ferment for 7 long, slow days. The air around it is rich with the aroma of developed flavor. The stillness of the fermentation corner will soon give way to the activity of the cooking area. These final days are the culmination of the waiting. They are the period when the hidden work of the microbes fully reveals itself through scent and sight. The plainness of the initial setup has given way to a complex, promising aroma. The quiet has been working tirelessly. And now that the 7-day period is reached, or the signs indicate readiness, it's time to gently awaken the beef from its fermented slumber and prepare it for the heat of the cooking fire. The fermentation is complete. The long wait is over. The process of turning this transformed ingredient into a flavorful soup is about to begin. 7 days have passed. The onggi pot has sat in its quiet corner, a silent alchemist, transforming raw beef and salty brine into something complex and flavorful. You've observed the subtle signs on days 1 and 2, monitored the developing aroma and gentle bubbling on days 3 and 4, and seen and smelled the intensified results in the final stretch. The aroma around the pot now is rich, tangy, deeply savory, the unmistakable scent of a successful fermentation, a promise of the soup to come. The signs are clear, the beef is ready. The 7-day waiting period is over. Imagine approaching the pot one final time in its resting spot. You reach down, perhaps feeling the cool clay of the vessel, acknowledging the quiet work it has done. You untie the cord or rope that secured the lid and the cloth cover. Feel the slight resistance as you loosen the knots. You carefully lift the heavy clay lid, setting it aside with a soft thud on a clean surface. Beneath the lid, the cloth or paper cover might be slightly damp or stained from contact with the fermenting contents. You carefully peel back this protective layer. As you do, the full, rich aroma of the fermented beef and brine hits you. It's likely quite strong, a concentrated blend of savory, tangy, perhaps slightly cheesy or yeasty notes. It's the smell of deep flavor, developed over time by microbial action. It might be a smell that takes some getting used to if you're not familiar with fermented meats, but to an experienced ancient court cook, it would be the smell of success, of a dish progressing as it should. Breathe it in, the pungent, promising scent of transformation. Now, you look at the contents of the pot. The brine is likely cloudy now, a murky, perhaps yellowish or reddish-brown liquid. Floating within it are the pieces of beef you placed there a week ago. But they don't look like raw beef anymore. Their color might be paler, more muted. Their texture is noticeably different. They appear softer, perhaps slightly swollen or changed in shape. They might be sitting lower in the liquid than they were initially, or they might be clustered together. Your task is to remove these pieces of fermented beef from the brine. Imagine reaching into the pot with clean hands or perhaps a large, slotted wooden spoon or scoop. The brine is cool or at ambient temperature, not warm. You feel for the pieces of beef. They feel soft, somewhat delicate, easily yielding to pressure compared to the firmness of raw beef. As you lift them out, the excess brine drips back into the pot. The smell is even stronger up close, emanating directly from the beef itself. You place the removed beef pieces into a clean bowl or onto a tray. As you remove piece after piece, the level of the murky brine in the onggi pot drops, revealing the inner surface of the pot, perhaps stained and coated with a thin layer of sediment from the fermentation process. You continue until all the beef pieces have been transferred from the fermentation pot to their temporary holding place. The pieces sit there now, no longer submerged, displaying their altered appearance and emitting that distinctive, pungent, fermented aroma. This act of removing the fermented beef signifies the end of the fermentation phase and the transition to cooking. The beef has achieved the desired level of flavor development and tenderization from the microbial action. It is ready to be cooked into soup. This process of fermenting meat for tenderization and flavor before cooking is a historical practice found in various cultures, though specific methods and durations varied. Taking the meat out at the right time, guided by the sensory cues, is crucial to proceed with the recipe. It's like taking dough out of the proofing basket. It's ready for the oven now. What happens to the fermentation brine left in the onggi pot? It wouldn't necessarily be discarded. This flavorful, salty liquid, now infused with the essence of fermented beef, could potentially be used as a base or flavoring for other dishes, perhaps strained and saved. Or, if it was deemed too potent or used primarily to extract flavors from the beef, it might be part of the waste from the royal kitchen, albeit waste with a significant historical process behind it. Reusing fermentation liquids or leftover brines from various processes, like kimchi, as flavorings is a quirky tidbit of traditional Korean cuisine, demonstrating resourcefulness and a love for complex, fermented flavors. Nothing went to waste if it could add depth to another dish, especially in a large kitchen operation like the royal court. Historians still argue whether the leftover brine from meat fermentation processes in ancient Korean court kitchens was consistently saved and utilized in specific ways, or if its use varied widely depending on the specific recipe, the abundance of other ingredients, or the preferences of the head cook at the time. Was this particular beef brine considered a valuable byproduct to be carefully stored and used, or was it merely the liquid medium for fermentation and usually discarded once the beef was removed? Written records don't always detail the fate of every single byproduct in the ancient kitchen. The fermented beef pieces in the bowl or on the tray sit waiting for the next step. They are soft to the touch, perhaps slightly sticky. The aroma is strong, promising a powerful, savory base for the soup. This is meat that has been fundamentally changed. It's not going to be tough or bland. The week of waiting, the quiet work in the onggi pot, has broken it down, tenderized it, and infused it with complex notes. Imagine picking up one of the pieces. Its texture feels different from raw beef. It's more pliable, perhaps with a slight springiness from the fermentation. The color is muted, less vibrant red. The smell is undeniably potent, savory and tangy. It's a smell that speaks of time, of transformation, of hidden processes. This step of removing the beef is simple, a physical transfer from one container to another. But it's also symbolic. It marks the conclusion of the passive, waiting phase and the beginning of the active cooking phase. The beef's journey in the onggi is over, its journey to the soup pot is about to begin. The potential that was sealed within the clay walls for 7 days is now exposed, ready to be combined with heat and other ingredients to create the final dish. The onggi pot, now empty of its beefy cargo, sits quietly in the fermentation area, perhaps waiting to be cleaned out and prepared for its next batch of kimchi, sauce, or another ferment. Its work on the beef soup ingredient is complete. Your focus is now entirely on the fermented beef pieces, sitting in the bowl, emanating that rich aroma, ready for the application of heat. The physical act of removing the beef is straightforward, but the transformation it represents is significant. It's the culmination of a week of quiet waiting, a process that requires patience and trust. The air around the bowl of fermented beef is filled with that unique, deep aroma, a preview of the flavors that will soon fill the soup pot and, eventually, perhaps the king's chambers. The fermented beef is out of the pot. The next step is to apply heat, to begin the cooking process that will turn this transformed ingredient into a comforting, flavorful soup. The quiet is about to give way to the gentle sounds of simmering. You've successfully removed the fermented beef from the onggi pot. It sits there in the bowl or on the tray, those pieces of meat fundamentally changed by their week-long soak in the salty brine. They look different, feel softer, and smell distinctly tangy and savory. The waiting part of the process is over. Now, it's time to apply heat, to take this transformed ingredient and begin turning it into an actual soup. This next step is crucial, the initial boiling of the fermented beef. Imagine moving from the quiet, cool fermentation area to the warmer, more active cooking area of the royal kitchen. The air here is different, warmer, perhaps a bit smoky from the fires, filled with the aromas of other dishes being prepared. You carry the bowl or tray of fermented beef, the weight substantial, the unique aroma following you. You approach a cooking station, likely centered around a large hearth or a series of braziers holding cooking pots over low fires. You need a suitable pot for the boiling. It would be a large cooking pot, likely made of sturdy metal like iron or bronze, designed to sit over a fire and hold a significant volume of liquid. Imagine selecting a pot of the right size, perhaps one with a rounded bottom and handles on the sides. It feels heavy as you prepare it, perhaps rinsing it out with clean water before use. Now, you transfer the fermented beef pieces into this cooking pot. Imagine lifting the pieces from the bowl, perhaps feeling their soft texture again, and placing them gently into the bottom of the pot. Hear the soft thud as they land against the metal. You continue until all the beef from the fermentation pot is now resting in the cooking pot. The unique aroma of the fermented meat is now more concentrated within the cooking vessel. Next, you add liquid for boiling. For a beef soup, this would primarily be water. Clean water, essential for cooking. You add enough water to generously cover the beef pieces, ensuring they will be fully submerged as the liquid heats and boils. Imagine pouring the water into the pot, the sound of the liquid filling the space around the beef. The water turns slightly cloudy or colored as it mixes with any residual brine or sediment clinging to the meat. With the beef and water in the pot, it's time to apply heat. You position the heavy pot over a low fire or place it on a brazier. The heat from the fire begins to transfer through the metal of the pot, slowly warming the water. This application of heat transforms the fermented beef further. It will continue to tenderize the meat and, crucially, begin extracting the complex flavors developed during fermentation into the water, creating the foundational broth for the soup. Boiling meat to create broth is a fundamental cooking technique practiced globally for millennia, a mainstream historical fact that forms the basis of countless soups and stews. It's the ancient world's way of saying, let's capture all that yummy flavor in liquid form. As the water heats, subtle changes begin to occur. The aroma emanating from the pot intensifies, becoming warmer, richer, the tangy notes of fermentation mingling with the simple smell of heating beef and water. You might start to see wisps of steam rising from the surface of the water as it approaches simmering temperature. Small bubbles might form on the bottom and sides of the pot, slowly rising to the surface. The goal of this initial boiling isn't necessarily a rapid, rolling boil, but often a long, slow simmer. Simmering, a temperature just below boiling, is ideal for extracting flavors and tenderizing meat gently over an extended period without making the broth cloudy or the meat tough. A long, slow simmer allows the connective tissues in the beef to break down, making the fermented meat incredibly tender, and allows those deep, complex fermented flavors to infuse the water, creating a rich base for the soup. Imagine the pot sitting quietly over the low fire, the liquid barely moving, just an occasional bubble breaking the surface. This quiet, patient simmering is a hallmark of traditional soup making. It's like slow roasting, but in liquid. This initial boiling phase could last for a significant period, perhaps an hour or more, depending on the desired tenderness of the beef and the concentration of flavor needed for the broth. You wouldn't just boil it for a few minutes. It needs time for the heat to work on the fermented tissues and for the flavors to fully develop in the liquid. It's another instance of patience being a key ingredient in ancient court cuisine. Rushing this step would mean less tender beef and a less flavorful broth. As the beef simmers, you might notice some impurities or foam rising to the surface of the liquid. An experienced cook would likely skim this off periodically with a clean ladle or spoon. This skimming helps to keep the broth clear and removes any undesirable bits that could affect the flavor or appearance of the final soup. Imagine standing over the gently simmering pot, quietly scooping off the light foam that gathers on the surface, discarding it into a waste vessel. It's a small, repetitive task, requiring attention to detail but adding to the clarity and purity of the broth. This practice of skimming impurities during boiling is a quirky tidbit found in many traditional soup-making techniques, a simple way to refine the final liquid. Historians still argue whether the precise duration of this initial boiling phase for fermented beef soup in ancient Korean court kitchens was strictly standardized, or if it was adjusted based on factors like the age and cut of the beef, the intensity of the fermentation, or even the time constraints of preparing the day's meal for the king. Was there a set time like boil for exactly 1 hour at a low simmer? Or was it more flexible, relying on the cook testing the meat for tenderness? The degree of flexibility in ancient cooking times is often debated due to varying conditions and the subjective nature of readiness. The air around the cooking station is now filled with a new aroma, the comforting, rich smell of beef broth simmering, layered with the tangy, savory notes from the fermentation. It's a smell that speaks of warmth, nourishment, and the promise of a satisfying meal. This scent mixes with the general aromas of the royal kitchen, creating a complex olfactory landscape. You continue to monitor the pot, ensuring the heat remains low and the simmering is gentle. The beef is softening, becoming more tender with each passing minute. The liquid is slowly extracting those deep, fermented flavors, transforming into a rich, aromatic broth. This step is crucial in integrating the unique flavor profile of the fermented beef into the soup base. The long, slow application of heat is the partner to the slow, cool work of fermentation. The sounds are gentle, the soft, steady hiss of the low fire, the barely perceptible murmur of the simmering liquid. There's a quiet rhythm to this stage of cooking, a patient waiting as heat and time work their magic. It's less physically demanding than the initial preparation, more about oversight and patience. It's another moment of quiet, focused work in the ancient kitchen, conducive to a relaxed state of mind. As the initial boiling progresses, the beef is rendered tender, the brine has flavored the water. The foundation of the soup's liquid is being established, drawing all those week-old flavors into the broth. The fermented beef is no longer just a preserved ingredient, it is becoming the heart of the soup, its essence infusing the liquid. The transformation continues, now guided by heat rather than microbes. This stage is essential. Without it, the fermented beef would not be tender enough, and its flavors would not be properly integrated into a soup format. The patient boiling unlocks the final potential of the 7-day fermentation. You've started the fire, placed the pot, added the beef and water, and now you wait, monitoring the gentle simmer, watching the steam rise, inhaling the developing aroma. The initial boiling is nearing completion. The beef is tenderizing, the broth is deepening. The next steps will involve adding the other ingredients that will complete this complex, patiently prepared soup for the ancient Korean court. The beef has been boiled. The stage is set for layering in more flavor. The pot of fermented beef is now gently simmering over the low fire. The water has transformed into a rich, aromatic broth, extracting all those complex, tangy, savory notes from the week-long fermentation. The beef itself is becoming wonderfully tender, its texture softening with the sustained, gentle heat. But a soup isn't just broth and meat, not usually anyway. To build a truly layered and satisfying dish, fit for the royal table, you need to add other ingredients, vegetables, seasonings, perhaps other liquids to enhance the depth of flavor. Imagine the array of ingredients prepared and waiting nearby in the busy royal kitchen. Root vegetables scrubbed clean, leafy greens washed, various flavorings measured out. These are the elements that will complete the soup, adding texture, freshness, sweetness, pungency, and additional layers of umami to the already established base. It's like building a flavor profile brick by brick, adding dimension to the foundational beef broth. You wouldn't just hand the king a bowl of clear, beef-flavored water, would you? Probably not a great career move. What kind of vegetables might find their way into this ancient Korean beef soup? Common additions would include things like Korean radish, mu, a staple vegetable, adding a refreshing, slightly peppery sweetness and becoming wonderfully soft after simmering. You might also add green onions, pa, for their pungent freshness, or garlic and ginger, fundamental aromatics in Korean cooking that would complement the fermented beef flavors beautifully. Mushrooms, if available, could add an earthy, umami richness. These vegetables would need to be prepared, washed, peeled, if necessary, and cut into appropriate sizes, not too large, not too small, pieces that will cook evenly and be easy to eat in a soup. Imagine the quiet work of washing radishes, peeling the papery skin from garlic cloves, slicing green onions on a cutting board. It's simple, repetitive labor, but each action contributes to the final dish. With the beef simmering, you would begin adding these vegetables to the pot. The order of addition might matter, with harder vegetables like radish going in earlier to give them time to soften, and more delicate ingredients like green onions added closer to the end. You carefully place the prepared vegetables into the gently bubbling broth. Hear the soft splash as the radish pieces enter the liquid, the subtle scattering sound as chopped green onions are added. See the colors of the vegetables contrast with the dark, rich broth. They sink into the liquid, beginning their journey of cooking and blending their flavors with the beef and broth. But vegetables alone aren't enough to season a soup. The true depth of flavor in traditional Korean cuisine comes from its unique fermented condiments and other flavorings. This is where ingredients like soy sauce, gochujang, and potentially soybean paste, doenjang, come into play. Soy sauce, made from fermented soybeans, is the cornerstone of Korean seasoning, providing salinity, umami, and a complex depth that salt alone cannot replicate. Soybean paste, also fermented soybeans, offers a different kind of savory, earthy umami and a thicker consistency. These fermented pastes and sauces were absolutely essential flavoring agents in ancient Korean cooking, defining the taste of countless dishes. This fundamental role of fermented products like gochujang and doenjang as key seasonings is a mainstream historical fact of traditional Korean cuisine, their production and use dating back centuries. They were the ancient umami bombs, packed with flavor. You would measure out the appropriate amounts of these seasonings. Imagine scooping a rich, dark paste from a clay jar or pouring a stream of dark, aromatic liquid soy sauce. The smell of these fermented products is powerful, salty, savory, deeply complex. You add them to the simmering soup, stirring gently with a ladle to ensure they disperse and blend into the broth. See the broth's color deepen as the soy sauce is added. Feel the liquid thicken slightly if soybean paste is used. Beyond these fermented staples, other seasonings would be added to fine-tune the flavor. Garlic, having been potentially added earlier as a vegetable, might also be added in paste form for a stronger punch. Ginger, for warmth and pungency. Perhaps a touch of black pepper. And of course, additional salt might be needed to adjust the overall salinity after adding the vegetables and other liquids. You would taste the broth periodically, carefully dipping a ladle into the pot, blowing gently to cool it, and taking a small sip. Tasting the broth is crucial for adjusting seasonings, a practice as old as cooking itself. Imagine the concentration on your face as you taste, assessing the balance of saltiness, tanginess, savory depth, and the flavors from the vegetables. Does it need more soy sauce? More garlic? A pinch more salt? This iterative process of adding and tasting is key to achieving the desired flavor profile. It's like tuning an instrument, but the notes are flavors. And if you get it wrong, the king might politely decline his soup, which, again, career limiting. Historians still argue whether the specific combination and proportions of seasonings used in a royal court soup like this fermented beef soup were meticulously standardized in written recipes, or if there was room for variation based on the head cook's expertise, the availability of ingredients, or even subtle royal preferences that weren't always formally documented. Did the recipe call for exactly X grams of gochujang and Y grams of doenjang? Or was it more like add soy sauce to taste, guided by the wisdom of your ancestors and the king's known dislikes? The precise degree of standardization in ancient court recipes is a complex subject. Adding these ingredients transforms the simmering liquid from a basic beef broth into a complex, layered soup. The vegetables contribute freshness and body. The seasonings provide depth, salinity, and umami. The aroma in the kitchen changes again, becoming richer, more inviting, a harmonious blend of fermented beef, simmering vegetables, and savory seasonings. It's a smell that promises warmth and nourishment. Imagine the quiet sounds, the gentle simmer of the soup, the soft clinking of the ladle against the pot as you stir, the hushed instructions given by the head cook. It's a picture of focused, collaborative culinary work, where each person contributes to the creation of a dish for a very important person. A quirky tidbit about seasoning in ancient Korean court kitchens is the potential for using specific types of water or broth bases beyond plain water for different dishes, such as a vegetable broth or even a pre-made stock, to add further layers of flavor to the cooking liquid itself before the main seasonings were added. While our recipe focused on water initially, a court kitchen might have had access to various liquid bases to elevate their soups. Imagine adding a ladleful of carefully prepared mushroom broth to the beef soup, adding another layer of earthy depth. It shows the level of detail and complexity possible in royal cuisine. The addition of these ingredients is a process of layering flavors, building upon the foundation of the fermented beef and its broth. It's not a quick dump and stir, it's a careful integration of different components, allowing each to contribute to the whole. The soup is becoming more than the sum of its parts, its flavors developing and melding together in the simmering pot. With the vegetables added and the seasonings incorporated, the soup is nearing its final form. The long wait for the fermentation is over, the initial boiling has extracted the core flavors, and now the supporting ingredients have been added to create complexity and balance. The air is thick with the rich, savory aroma, a testament to the patient work that has gone into this dish. The pot continues its gentle simmer over the low fire. The colors of the vegetables are softening, their flavors infusing the broth. The seasonings are doing their work, bringing everything into harmony. This stage is about integration, about allowing the different elements to meld together into a coherent, delicious whole. The soup is almost ready. The final simmering period, allowing all the flavors to fully combine and the ingredients to finish cooking, is the next and final step before this 7-day labor of love is ready to be served. The ingredients are in. The flavors are melding. The final moments of the soup's preparation await. The fragrant, complex aroma of the soup now fills the air around the cooking station, a rich blend of fermented beef, savory seasonings, and tender vegetables. The pot sits over the low fire, the liquid within gently simmering, the surface occasionally disturbed by a lazy bubble breaking through. All the ingredients have been added, the patiently fermented and initially boiled beef, the carefully prepared vegetables, the essential fermented seasonings like soy sauce and perhaps soybean paste. This final stage is about allowing all these elements to truly come together, to meld and harmonize into a finished dish ready for the king's table. It's a period of quiet, patient waiting, allowing time and gentle heat to perform their final work of integration. Imagine looking into the pot. The pieces of fermented beef, now wonderfully tender from the long boiling, are visible among the softened vegetables, the translucent slices of radish, the green of onions perhaps added later, the darker hues of mushrooms if they were used. The broth is no longer just beefy water, it's a deep, opaque liquid, its color enriched by the soy sauce and the essence of the cooked ingredients. Steam rises gently, carrying that complex aroma. This final simmering period serves several purposes. It ensures that any vegetables added later, like softer greens, cook through to the desired tenderness. It allows the flavors from all the components, the beef, the vegetables, the seasonings, to fully infuse the broth and penetrate the solid ingredients, creating a more cohesive and balanced taste. It's like giving all the different musicians in an orchestra time to rehearse together after they've learned their individual parts. They need time to blend their sounds into a harmonious performance. The longer the gentle simmer, within reason, the deeper and more integrated the flavors tend to become. During this final simmer, the cook would continue to monitor the soup. They wouldn't leave it unattended. Periodic gentle stirring would ensure nothing sticks to the bottom of the pot and helps distribute the flavors evenly. More importantly, there would be final taste tests. Carefully ladling a small amount of broth, allowing it to cool, and tasting it to make any last-minute adjustments to the seasoning, a pinch more salt, a tiny splash more soy sauce, perhaps a touch of ginger or garlic if needed. This final tuning of the flavor profile is crucial to ensuring the soup is perfectly balanced and delicious, meeting the high standards expected for the king's meal. Imagine the quiet concentration on the cook's face during this final tasting, their experienced palate the ultimate judge of readiness. The sounds are minimal, the consistent, low hiss of the fire, the soft gurgle of the soup, the gentle clinking of the ladle against the pot. The pace is slow, deliberate. There's no rushing this final stage. It's about patience, allowing the heat and time to work their magic, coaxing out the full potential of the ingredients, including that patiently fermented beef. As the soup reaches its peak, vegetables perfectly tender, flavors fully melded, aroma rich and inviting, it's ready. The simmering is complete. The pot is carefully lifted from the fire or moved to the side of the hearth, the heat source removed. The soup rests for a moment, the intense heat subsiding slightly, the flavors continuing to settle. Now comes the transition from cooking vessel to serving vessel. Royal court meals were often served in beautiful, specially made pottery or metalware. The soup wouldn't be ladled directly from the large cooking pot at the hearth to the king's individual bowl. It would likely be transferred to a smaller, presentable serving tureen or bowl first. Imagine carefully ladling the finished soup from the heavy cooking pot into a beautiful piece of court pottery, perhaps a ceramic bowl with a subtle glaze, or a metal vessel. The rich, steaming liquid, the tender pieces of beef, the colorful vegetables, they are transferred with care, ensuring the presentation is as perfect as the preparation. The aroma is strongest right at this moment of transfer, a cloud of savory steam rising. The serving itself would be a ritualistic process. Royal meals were served with great ceremony and protocol, with specific officials responsible for presenting each dish to the king. The presentation of the soup, in its fine serving vessel, would be part of this larger performance. It would be carried from the kitchen by designated personnel, presented to the king with appropriate deference. This ritualistic presentation of royal meals is a mainstream historical fact, reflecting the structured nature of court life and the symbolic importance of the king's food. It wasn't just about getting calories into the monarch, it was a display of order, wealth, and service. For the person preparing the soup, this moment of transfer to the serving vessel is the culmination of days of work. From sourcing the beef, through the meticulous 7-day fermentation in the onggi, the initial boiling, the addition of vegetables and seasonings, to this final simmer and transfer. The soup is finished. Your quiet, patient labor has resulted in this rich, aromatic dish, ready for the king. A quirky tidbit related to court dining is the practice of serving many dishes simultaneously, rather than in courses. The king's table would be laden with numerous bowls and plates, each containing a different item. So, your carefully prepared fermented beef soup would take its place among an array of other dishes, rice, kimchi, almost certainly, other vegetable preparations, perhaps some grilled or stewed items. It would be one part of a larger, visually impressive culinary spread. Imagine your soup sitting alongside dozens of other colorful dishes, all vying for the king's attention. Historians still argue whether the primary criterion for evaluating a dish in the ancient Korean court kitchen was its adherence to traditional recipes and techniques, or if there was room for innovation or adaptation to suit the king's specific tastes or preferences, implying a degree of culinary artistry beyond mere execution of protocol. Was a good soup one that was made exactly as prescribed, or one that pleased the king's palate, even if it involved subtle deviations? The balance between rigid tradition and creative adaptation in court cuisine is a complex area of study. As the soup is carried away from the cooking station, destined for the king's dining chamber, you might take a final, quiet breath of its lingering aroma. It's the smell of time, of patience, of microbial magic, of careful cooking, all combined into a single, rich scent. Your task is complete. The long process, stretching over 7 days of waiting and culminating in this final simmer and serving, has reached its conclusion. The air in the kitchen slowly begins to change as the finished soup is removed. The intense concentration of that particular aroma dissipates, making way for the smells of other dishes still being prepared, or the lingering scent of wood smoke and cooked food. The quiet rhythm of the kitchen continues, focused on other tasks, other dishes. You are left with the quiet afterglow of the completed process. The empty cooking pot, the clean fermentation vessel return to its area, the memory of the soup's rich smell and appearance. It was a journey into the slow, deliberate world of ancient court cuisine, a world where time was an ingredient and patience was a virtue. The order of preparation, from the initial choice of beef to the final serving, was a choreography of care, tradition, and culinary skill. This exploration of a seemingly simple dish, stretched out over 7 days of fermentation and then a final cooking, highlights the depth and complexity often hidden within historical everyday, or in this case, royal, practices. It was a process that demanded patience, attention to detail, and a reliance on natural transformations. And focusing on that slow, methodical process, step by quiet step, is the perfect way to ease your mind, slow your thoughts, and prepare you for your own quiet period of rest and transformation, sleep. The soup is served. The historical journey is complete. All that remains is to let the gentle rhythm of the past carry you into the stillness of the present moment. The sounds of the ancient court kitchen are fading now, becoming soft whispers carried on a distant breeze. The clinking of pots, the hushed voices, the gentle simmer of the soup, it's all receding. The air is clearing, the complex aromas dissolving into nothingness. You are no longer standing by the hearth, you are here, now, in your own quiet space, settling down. Feel your body growing heavier, softer, sinking comfortably into the surface beneath you. The thoughts about beef, brine, onggi pots, and 7-day waits are slowly drifting away, like smoke rising from a dying fire. There is nothing left to prepare, nothing left to monitor, nothing left to serve. The historical journey has reached its end, leaving behind only a profound sense of calm. Your breathing is slow, even. Your muscles are relaxed. Let go of any lingering thoughts or worries. They are not needed here. The patience of the ancient cooks, the quiet transformation of the ingredients, the slow rhythm of time, let these feelings stay with you, a gentle blanket of tranquility. You are safe. You are settled. The day's concerns are distant, unimportant. The complex flavors of the soup are fading, replaced by a growing sense of emptiness, a peaceful void that is ready to welcome sleep. Just allow yourself to sink deeper, softer, into the quiet stillness that is waiting for you. There is nothing more to do, nowhere else to be. Just let go. Drift further, deeper, into the soft, welcoming darkness. Sleep is here. Sweet dreams.